Hey, and welcome to the Reset Podcast. Everything you need to know that your therapist probably never told you. Researched by experts, real life experiences. This is Reset. Hey, and welcome back to the Reset Podcast, and Happy New Year and Happy Season 2. We cannot believe that we have already completed one season with y'all, and we can't wait to dive into a new season. This season, we are going to bring you new materials. We're going to bring new, fresh conversations on mental health. And to start off the new year, we have with us one of our coaches and therapists who works with us at the Reset Group, Casey Cooper. She and Joe are going to be taking us all through a lot of information on teens. So you probably want to get your notebook and pen ready if you have teens or maybe kids that are going to someday become teens. This is a 3-part series, so today you'll be listening to episode 1 of 3. So make sure that you sit back and grab a pen and take in all the wisdom from these two awesome therapists.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Reset Podcast. And for today's episode, we actually have a special guest with us. We have our very own Casey Cooper, who is one of our Reset coaches and also a clinical therapist who works with a lot of our teams when it comes to athletes, and also works with a lot of our clinical clients, and specifically a population that we're going to talk about today, which is teenagers. And we see a ton of teens. And by teens, I'm going to say junior high, so I'd say 7th grade and older. And I'm going to throw in there today also college age kids, like emerging adulthood or young adulthood, just because I feel like it's just, I don't know, they're kind of like all going through the same stuff, which I think is like COVID. I think it kind of grouped them all together when it comes to their development and things like that. But Casey, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's super awesome to be here in the Reset Lab and see it all live and in action.
Well, what is one thing that you're seeing, especially in the last 2 or 3 years with teenagers that you work with, specifically just around COVID, coming out of COVID? Because I know pre-COVID, we and I have discussed this, that things have totally changed when it comes to problems that we're working with, when it comes to even, I say, dynamics that we're seeing among families with teenagers. So what have you seen since COVID when it comes to our teenage population?
I would say that what I'm seeing and what I'm coaching a lot of parents through is that the developmental age of our teenagers and their emotional or cognitive age, we're seeing a gap there. And so between them taking the time off for COVID and being isolated, I don't think a lot of them got to use some of the emotional and social muscles that we are used to using in those very formative years. And so I've been telling a lot of my clients' parents that if you have an 18-year-old, developmentally, they're looking more like a 16-year-old. So subtract 2 from their age, and that's really where we're seeing them. So a 16-year-old is really showing up like a 14-year-old. A 14-year-old is really showing up like a 12-year-old. And when you think of it from that perspective, the 12-year-old mind and a 14-year-old mind is vastly different. And so sometimes we have to approach our kids in a different way because their developmental age and their emotional age, I don't think are really congruent right now because of that 2-year pause we kind of put on a lot of development.
Well, that's a great point. I think part of the whole COVID response to COVID teenagers is the aspect they lost like 2 years of just development. Like you said, not working certain muscles, whether that's muscles of disappointments, muscles of just learning grit or emotional muscles or relational muscles. And the byproduct of it is we see kind of this delay of like launching or delay in even having certain maturity levels. And I think this is really frustrating with a lot of our parents because they see these 18, 19, 20-year-olds and they're just not launching. And I know for us, we've been talking a lot about how we've been getting a lot of calls after the first semester of college where a lot of our kiddos are failing out, not doing well in school or college specifically because they go away to college and they just feel not prepared, either not prepared to take on time management skills, not attending class, the inability to, take on so many of the social, dynamics mixture with, having a lot of independence within the academic area. And then you throw in like an athlete, for example, and then they have a lot of meetings they have to do. And so we're seeing a lot of, I hate to say it, but like failures in in college. Like if there's ever a best time or good time for people to go to junior college and kind of get that extra year at home to be able to just grow a little, I think now is it.
I totally agree.
And we're just seeing these freshmen who are, by the way, majority of the kiddos that we see are high functioning AP students or IB students, great athletes who come from great intact families, and they just struggle even going away to college, which all of us struggle on somewhat, but to a point where there's failure.
I think the transition went from a transition of excitement to a transition of fearfulness. And that fearfulness, I think, is implementing the failure that we're seeing a lot at that level.
Well, and we see the fact is that a lot of our kids want to come back home. Like it used to be where I don't want to come back home. I don't want to be back at home. I just want to lunch and just be with my friends in college. A lot of these kids actually, they want the comfort of and having the less stress and less responsibility to come back home to kind of gain opportunity to build up those muscles that they're lacking for those two years in high school, per se, that they had during COVID, that they just need to kind of just regroup themselves and learn how do I just have time management, and how do I be able to learn to just take on many things, juggle many balls, and still be successful with it. And so many of them just don't do well. And it's not just one or two. We're talking about lots. Lots of our clients are struggling with that. And the ones that do stick with college, I'm telling you, that freshman year is so hard for them emotionally, hard for them mentally to just be able to withstand it, either because they're missing friends or they're missing, oddly enough, family. And it's hard. It's really interesting to see that college is revealing a lot of the lack of development that occurred when COVID was there.
I agree. And I have a history and experience of working actually directly in the college setting. I worked as a therapist at a local university, and it was also really evident and clear. I think another thing that happens in that transition that makes some of our clients really susceptible to some emotional wounds and difficulties is that for the first time, right, they're stepping away from the home. They're stepping away, a lot of them, especially the population we work with, they've grown up in the exact same community with the exact same friends. And so I kind of use the example sometimes that if you're staring at a mural and you're face to face with the mural, you might only see a very small picture of it. And I think for the first time, right, these kids are stepping back with emotional and physical distance from their communities, from their families, from their friend groups. And I'm noticing a lot of them are reflecting on some wounds that were part of that bigger mural that they never noticed because they were so close to it. And so I think a lot of, at least my clients, are coming and reflecting and on some big gaps there, whether it's emotional wounds, whether it was not being nurtured a certain way, but they're not realizing it until they've stepped far enough away that they're seeing the discrepancies in their childhood.
Well, and that's what they're kind of talking about when they go away to college and they talk to us, is they're getting this perspective. We always talk about distance gives perspective, either distance from the home or distance from, it could just be physical distance or emotional distance, where it may be. But a lot of them start getting these different perspectives, mainly because they kind of step out of their chaos, not necessarily at home at all, but just the chaos of just, the hustle and bustle of just being in the mayhem of today's pressures of school, of high school and such. And they kind of get a little bit of a breather because they have a lot more margin to work with in college. And they start recognizing, like, man, what have I gone through? What have I done? Or what we hear from a lot of them is they take Psychology 101 that first semester, and they're like, I think I have this. I think I went through this. And so they start kind of looking at themselves through a different lens. But it's all real. And they're now, for the first time, facing it at the same time, trying to do it as they share a room with a roommate for the first time and trying to navigate all that. They also want healing, and they also want an opportunity to know what strategies I can use. So there's I think there's a lot of good in the aspect of going away to college. I know you and I for years have talked about how important it is our clients to go away to college, just to get away and get a sense of your legs underneath you when it comes to just being an individual and be independent. Obviously, it's not for everyone, but we're really seeing it now where it's an opportunity at times for them to reveal a lot of these underdeveloped areas of them as a person, as an identity that comes up.
And I think for a lot of the clients, as you mentioned, we work with, they're so high functioning that a lot of them overworked certain muscles to get to the college level. And so we're working with huge universities and really established and prestigious, environments. And so they've overworked a lot of muscles. And so what I'm also noticing is that a lot of my clients get to that level. They've worked their butts off to get there, right? They've have the 4.9 GPAs and the perfect ACT scores, all of the community service hours in the world, and they get to that main stage that they've been fighting for, and they get what I call like emotional whiplash, is that all of a sudden it stops, and they don't really know what to do with themselves. And that emotional whiplash, I think recovering from that for the 4 years of high school, and even some of them beginning in middle school, that they've been working to get to this level. And even as athletes or as students, they get to that level. And it's this emotional whiplash that they kind of experience because the brakes actually kind of get put on.
Well, I think this goes along the category in which we see a lot of burnout. We get a lot of referrals regarding burnout, whether that's academic burnout, if it's the arts or the athletics. I call it the triple A's. And the burnout usually occurs sophomore or junior year for a lot of our kiddos of high school. And here they are trying to do what they can to get into college, and they're burning out for anything, get to college. Or some, they get to college in that freshman year, they're just paralyzed. And so we're seeing this constant energy being taken away from them and being put in areas that doesn't give them, I would say, like healthiness back or give them health back. And so they're just always running on empty. And so we've seen this burnout where we talked about this before, the athletes, where a lot of our kiddos, junior year, that sport they've been with forever, let's say it's like soccer, they don't want to play soccer, now they want to play like lacrosse. And so they find a new love that they want to do. But then we also see the aspect of just the burnout when it comes to academics. I was thinking the other day, just so many of my clients were sick with sickness going around this time of year. And we used to get sick from school and we just stayed home and rest. Mm-hmm. Now, a lot of our kiddos, when they get sick, I go, are you resting? They go, no, I go online. I have to do the homework and class assignments. So they're not really resting when they have a fever. They're not really resting when they're having a sickness. They're continuing to work. And so they just don't have an opportunity just to be in rest and just reload or reset, as we say, when it comes to it.
And that reminds me of a conversation I just had when we were working with a very prestigious high school women's soccer program. And what came up when we were just in conversation and exploring maybe where some deficits were in the mindset aspect. And all of them kind of reflected different aspects of burnout, not knowing it was burnout. But what was really interesting is when we continued the dialogue is that a product, in my opinion, of their burnout was they actually lacked self-trust. Because of what you're saying is that when they get to a point of sickness, whether it's physical sickness or just emotionally, being sick as far as just needing a day off and time off, they then receive messages from teachers, coaches, parents of push through, you need to go, we have practice, get on Zoom, you got this. And so they were actually reflecting to me that they had betrayed really themselves and their gut so many times that they lack self-trust because people tell them when they're feeling down, no, you're not. And so then these are the people we launch into college and they have no self-trust. And then that leads, I think, to sometimes emotional failures because they don't know how to listen to themselves.
Well, that's a good point. Like the work that we do so much has to do with us teaching these teenagers to learn about their intuition, learning the aspect of listening to the right voice in their head, learning through failure, not through always being told what to do by, like you said, a text message, a group message, an email, a Zoom call. Like they're always being told what to do and how to do it, that they're not getting that environmental feedback in a healthy way on their own. They're only getting, imparting wisdom or getting feedback from like coaches or authorities, that they don't have that space to kind of learn to develop and to hear that right voice in their head, to understand how their intuition comes in, and to learn to, in many ways, to self-actuate, and then learn to be in maybe self-reliant or start working those muscles when they get into college. They hear that voice. They can't be just in so many ways, fell through, lack of understanding or lack of intuition when it comes to decision making. And so many times we're really trying to affirm our kiddos and trying to teach them, just celebrate decisions you make on your own, not the result of the decision, not so much the aspect of, what was the output that came, just the fact that you decide this on your own to do this, that's a win, versus in so many ways, a lot of our teenagers, especially high schoolers, they just feel they're always being told what to do in all areas of life because we have constant communication now. They feel highly micromanaged. And I don't think as parents we think about this often enough, about the amount of messages they're getting, the amount of text messages, group messages. Like everyone's in a sport or an art has a group message going either with the coach or the producer or the director or something. It's happening. Then you go into forums online when it comes to using like Canvas or other Blackboard, maybe that different schools are using right now. And then you add in the family group message, and then we add in all these, like they're always consuming information of either critiquing or what needs to happen or not need to happen. There's just no room for them to just think and have that space to do cause and effect thinking. If I choose this will happen. If I choose that will happen. Because they're always on to the next thing, or they're always being told what to do and how to do it. And as parents, I don't think we realize how that is not setting them up to go away to college or even to be on their own early on in their adulthood.
I agree. And I think we don't flex that decision-making muscle enough because I think as parents and as kiddos, we're so afraid to make the wrong decision. But we don't realize that recovery from wrong decisions is a crucial part of developmental strength, in my opinion. And so when we were coaching that specific program, that women's soccer program, I told them they were so afraid of making mistakes, so afraid of their playing at a very high level in the high school sports, and they were afraid to go against these big name teams. And my opinion, whether it's on the field or off the field, is that if you can become an expert on recovery, whether that's physical recovery, emotional recovery, burnout recovery, recovering from an error in sport, if you can become a recovery expert, I think that's where true health lies.
This is the part of our show where we talk about our opinions on the things that we observe. Observe and then respond, don't worry, you cannot be wrong. It's all about the way that your mind works. Observation feedback.
Casey, as you know, I love trees. I took horticulture in junior college with a professor named Charlie. And this is in Southern California, South Orange County. I'm not going to name the junior college, but let's just say it rhymes with Adelbeck. And
wow.
Yeah, there it is. And this is back in the day, and all he talked about was his pot farm. And
marijuana?
Yeah, it was not legal. And and I'm like, what is going on? And that was his. And that's all he talked about was his marijuana farm he had in the hills of Saddleback Mountains. And so, but it reminded me because in that class, we would learn about different trees. And certain trees had to be planted near each other. Certain trees couldn't be alone. And he would talk to us about the redwoods. And he'd say, if you're going to plant redwoods in someone's backyard, you can't just plant one redwood. Because a redwood tree, their roots don't go down. They don't go deep, they go wide. And so redwood trees are made to be with other redwood trees. Like they have a relationship, you know. And if you plant, you need basically 2 or more. And actually he said 3, 4, or 5 more is better. So they kind of like a mini forest. And you got to plant near each other. Because what happens is their roots actually go wide and they wrap around and connect with the other roots. And basically they hold on to each other. And so when a big storm comes or when the Santa Anas come in Southern California and the big winds come, they don't fall over. And they don't fall over because they have each other to hold on to with their roots. Now, if they were by themselves and you just planted one redwood, you'll see that in storms when they fall over, it's because they're not around each other. And it's a solo act. And they were not around their family. They were not connected to other tree friends. Is that the way you put it?
Tree friends. So to withstand storm
of life,
one must be connected in our roots. Correct? But could roots mean like your values?
It could be. Or maybe the fact is you need a community. You need a tribe. You need to not be alone to weather storms, winds of life. But also an interesting part about it to me is the aspect is that they hold on to each other. And we need people in life to hold on to when we have difficulties. I think we need when it comes to accountability. And the aspect of being, quote, a lone wolf just doesn't work for trees or for humans.
We need to be more like trees.
Redwoods, specifically.
Redwoods. Stand tall.
Things you learn in junior college horticultural class, which honestly was a very interesting class. I learned a lot about, then the final was the 9 steps to planting a lawn. And you take one of those classes, you're like, whatever. But I still memorized those 9 steps that in both of our first 2 houses, I redid the front yard and planted sod, grass. And I did the 9 steps.
His name was Chuck.
His name was Charlie, but we called him Chuck. And the belief system of the students, based on how the guy was talking, is that his water bottle is full of vodka.
Chuck sounds like a great time.
He had long gray hair, a beard, kind of like a Duck Dynasty vibe. But I mean, we're in Southern California. It's kind of an odd little bird.
He was ahead of his time.
Head of his time. And he was one of those people where we had a 3-hour lab, those 3-hour labs you take in college. And 20 minutes into the lab, he's like, all right, guys, I'm going to go take off. You can leave when you want to. And we were planting, this is the weird part, we were planting seeds to be grown. We had to water them, and we would grow them, and then he would sell them to the public. So basically, his lab was an opportunity for us as students to learn how to grow from seed different plants, different vegetables, grow them up, water them, and then he would take them and sell them to the public.
Chuck was a smart businessman.
I think he was a dealer in many ways. Different types of plants.
Don't get high on your own supply. Chuck knows best.
He knows best. The original Heisenberg.
Now back to the show.
Well, and that's something that needs to be taught. And I don't think we put enough emphasis on it as either coaches or teachers, professors, or even I'd say as parents. This is the new thought. This is like in many ways like the new style of thinking that needs to start occurring. Is it doesn't take much for these kids to get burnt out or to put them on the pathway of burnout. If you wait until you're burnt out to do certain strategies that we teach them, then it's too late. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of like we both went to the same clinical program, and the concept of self-care, we talked about this in different podcasts, where this concept of self-care was actually taught into us just because for our own profession, there's compassion fatigue, and they can get really fatigued when it comes to helping others, and it's just exhausting. And so how do you every day go and tap into that resource of feeling recovery, feeling the opportunity to like reload for then tomorrow? And for a lot of these kiddos, they don't. They live for the weekends, or they wait till they're completely burnt out and their body then just breaks down physically. And so then we get a tremendous amount of sickness in season when it comes to them. And so, the byproduct of it is the fact that they're really good workers.
Yeah.
And they're really good about making sure that they sell themselves to the process of either a team or academics, or maybe what they're not really good at is how do I care for self? And the byproduct of it is their emotional wellness is depleting. And like we say, mental toughness comes from emotional wellness. So if that happens, their mental toughness goes away. And that's when the performance aspect goes away as well. And then no one's happy at that point.
Yeah. And I think that's not only athletically, right? That's academic wise 100%. As well. And the feedback we get a lot is that they're afraid to do self-care because they think that by doing self-care and focusing on self, they are going to be letting someone else down. So a lot of our kiddos right now, they do other care, I would say. Everything is for somebody else, to meet somebody else's needs, but they are losing the ability to take care of self. So again, when we launch them on to college, that is such an underworked muscle that the muscle tears almost instantaneously. Yeah. In that first semester of college.
They get shocked. I mean, really, a lot of kids we talk about, they just get shocked. They're really good people, come from really awesome good families who are in many ways just not prepared for what was coming their way. And the byproduct of it is depression, it's anxiety, it's a tremendous amount of we call it a quarter life crisis. They try to figure out who they are. And it creates a lot of issues among parents too, where they feel like where we gone wrong and how did we fail or how do we fail our kids. And I just think this is just a slow cook that we got here as a culture where for many of us, the definition of a successful teenager, is one that gets great grades. That's usually probably a varsity athlete or is in high in the arts, that is going to get a pretty good ACT, SAT score and go to a great university. And you're able to get there or go to a university. If you're able to go there, then that defines you that you're a, successful child or person. But also, I think for parenting, it defines them as this is a successful parenting job looks like. And I think it's going to take a lot for that to change in our culture. But I think a lot of parents that we're working with is now getting it because they're seeing the pain and the exhaustion and the burnout of their kids.
And I think also when it comes to burnout, some of the language you use when we talk about it is that like your why has to be bigger than your what. And I think when we get to burnout, our what is so much more overwhelming than the why, to the point that I don't think some kids know their why. So for example, like the why might be, to get to a D1 school or to get to a prestigious school or what to graduate, whatever it might be. But when the what becomes so overwhelming, so the what is the studying, the tutoring, the ACT, pre-exams on the weekends, the training, the personal trainer, all of the whats, I think they start losing vision of the why. And I think once you start losing vision of the why, that's when we're so close to burnout.
Well, and I think what we see is the specific language in our clients for this population. This is when we insert the language of, I think I want to die, I'm suicidal, yes. I don't see a future. And this is when I feel like suicide ideation in so many, or suicide thoughts or thinking comes in for teenagers. Obviously, there is a certain population of mental illness where I think where we've seen, especially with us working in background programs and psych wards and things like that, where you do have teenagers who really do have extreme just major depression, chemical imbalance, and true suicide ideation. Plan, set, done. There it is. But then we have this other population, like a subpopulation of our kiddos that we work with, where a lot of them have feelings of suicide, but they don't want to die. They don't want to end their life, but they just don't see a way out of getting out of this pressure or getting out of this burnout. And the parents, they send the kid to us saying, my kid's suicidal. But when we actually get down to it, they're not suicidal like they don't want to live. They're more of, how do I get a break?
Yes.
How do I give myself permission to take a time out? How do I allow myself to kind of catch up and just be a kid at my age again? And that's when we kind of get more of the suicidal talk with a lot of our clients, because a lot of them have, you talk to them, they have a lot to live for. They have their goals, so they have their dreams, they have the aspirations. Like I say again, they have great families, and this is why I think the parents, they get so shocked when they read that text or they see maybe like a journal or diary, that type of language from them, not knowing is probably that kid's been burnout, red flag for many months, and they're at a point where it's like, okay, if I say this word, will this give me a break? And that's sad, it has to get to that point.
It's heartbreaking that when it comes to a break, that many of our teens and young adults, unfortunately, they are so burnt out that suicide actually starts looking like a break.
Good point.
And that's terrifying that it has to be that extreme to want to give yourself permission to take a break, that we would do so in such a permanent and lethal and devastating way. But I notice with my clients, when they do get to that point and we're talking about what's getting them there, there's usually, going back to the why and the what, usually they've lost sight of the why. Or another thing I'm really seeing lately is that their why is more defined in external factors than internal factors. So I'm like, why are we doing all this? It's like, because I want to make my parents happy, because I don't want to let down my coach. And so that's another thing I'm seeing is if the why is so defined in other people's intentions and opinions, I think it becomes a very fragile why very quickly.
Well, yeah, and I think that's where we come in with our work is creating that, what's the term? Internal locus of control versus
Yes.
external locus of control, which is the concept of how do we develop this inner being in the child or in a teenager, where they start recognizing, I need to do things for me that fills me up internally, that and my definition or my ego is wrapped around me internally versus external, either if it's successes or external, what people say about me, where it may be. Which, by the way, it's hard for some 40-year-olds to do this, let alone 14-year-olds to do it. And then you throw in this aspect of social media, and you throw in this aspect of just, having instant feedback from peers, from, hundreds of thousands of peers that they're connected with. And then it really does take a toll on really who they feel like they are, their identity, and also how they feel as an individual when it comes to sense of connectability. I think a lot of our kiddos feel lonely, even though they're part of these teams, even though they're part of a lot of activities or activity overload. But in the day, they feel lonely. It's the concept in which a lot of us could be alone but not feel lonely. That's kind of a healthy person. This other concept where a lot of people are around others and yet they feel lonely. I remember, I think a sociologist said that we're the most connected generation ever, but yet the most loneliest. We're the most connected generation, but also we have the most social anxiety. Or social phobias, which is, those are dichotomies that are existing, which makes me think too, because teaching adolescent psychology, the first lecture about teenagers is they have two needs: the need to belong and the need for independence. So if parents take away their need to belong, then we get a kid who act out, right? If they take away their sense of independence, then they act out too. So if the two biggest needs for kids who are 8th, 7th grade to college is they need to feel independent, autonomy, and or many ways start differentiating, as we would say, and their need to belong, right? How do we do that in healthy ways? Especially since I think you said recently, those two needs have been seen in different ways, especially in sense of belonging and with social media. And they're going through different ways now. Maybe you want to share more about that. I would love to hear your more thoughts about it.
Yeah, we've talked about that. These are the two trends, and I think the two trends are still on point as far as that need to be independent and that need to belong. I think that they are finding specifically with belongingness, it looks different. In my opinion, a couple years back, right? I think belongingness looked like being congruent and alike to my peers and the people around me. It felt safe to be alike. I think now what, you and I have noticed in the practice is really that there's a sense of belonging right now in being incongruent to my environment, of being different than my environment. The more I can kind of stick out in a really backwards, I guess, way, that's their sense of belonging now.
To continue this conversation, make sure that you tune in to episode 2. Thanks so much for listening to the Reset Podcast. We're so glad that you're here with us. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd love it if you left us a rating, a review, or hit that subscribe button, and share it with a friend that needs to hear this. We're here to help you live a better life. Overcome mental barriers that are holding you back from your full potential. Find free resources, our blog, and information for one-on-one coaching at theresetgroup.com. We'd love to connect with you on social media, so be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or TikTok at The Reset Group. See you later.